The old shop sat at the edge of the forgotten village, like a wound that refused to heal. Its wooden boards were warped with age, the roof sagged, and its broken windows looked like hollow eyes staring into the night. People in the nearby town whispered about it, telling stories of voices echoing from within when no one was there, of strange lights flickering in the upper windows, though no electricity had ever been installed. They said the shop was cursed, that anyone foolish enough to enter after dark would never walk out the same. But of course, stories like that only fed the curiosity of outsiders. When Ethan and his friends drove into the countryside that weekend, they weren't looking for trouble. They were just bored 20-somethings chasing a thrill, filming everything for a YouTube channel that barely had followers. They had heard rumors from a gas station clerk who refused to even mention the shop's name. "That place isn't right," the old man muttered, glancing toward the woods. "People go in, but they don't come out the same. Some don't come out at all." His words were meant to warn them, but instead, they worked like bait dangling before hungry fish. Ethan's grin widened as he looked at his camera. "Guys, this is perfect." They found the village near midnight, abandoned and silent, its streets swallowed by weeds and silence. The shop stood at the end of the dirt road, looming in the moonlight. The sign above the door was so faded it was impossible to tell what had once been written there. Its door creaked in the breeze, opening and closing like it was breathing. One of Ethan's friends, Marcus, shivered and muttered, "This feels wrong, man. Like, way too wrong." But the rest laughed it off, teasing him. They had flashlights, cameras, and the bravado that came with trying to look brave on camera. The second Ethan pushed the door open, a rush of cold air swept out like the building itself was exhaling. Dust swirled in the beam of their flashlights, but beneath it, they could see shelves lined with old, rotting goods, cans with rusted tops, glass jars filled with cloudy liquid, and what looked like a row of cracked dolls with missing eyes staring straight ahead. "What the hell?" whispered Lila, the only girl in the group. She reached toward one of the dolls, but the moment her hand got close, a sound echoed through the shop. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. Then it grew clearer, more insistent, as if a voice was standing right beside them. "Get out!" Marcus dropped his flashlight, and it rolled across the wooden floorboards with a hollow clatter. The group froze, every breath caught in their throats. The shop was empty, the air still, but the words had been unmistakable. Ethan forced a shaky laugh, lifting his camera to record. "It's probably just the wind," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Still, he pushed deeper inside, each step groaning on the floor like a warning. The shelves seemed to close in, and the shadows grew thicker around them, but what terrified them most was that they could hear movement in the back of the shop, slow, deliberate footsteps that did not belong to any of them. The footsteps seemed to come from the very back of the shop, where a narrow hallway disappeared into shadows so thick their flashlights couldn't cut through. Ethan kept the camera raised, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Hello? Is someone there?" His question was answered by silence, the kind that pressed in on all sides until even their own breathing sounded too loud. Lila gripped his arm tightly. "We shouldn't be here. We need to leave." But Ethan shook his head, more afraid of losing the footage than of the unknown. "If we get something on camera, it could blow up. This is what people want to see." Marcus wasn't convinced. He bent down to grab his dropped flashlight, but when he picked it up, he froze. The beam illuminated the floor, and there, in the dust, were footprints. They weren't theirs. The prints were bare, human-looking, but twisted, with long, claw-like impressions dragging at the end of each toe. "Ethan," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "Look at this." When Ethan panned the camera down, the group went silent. The prints led deeper into the hallway. And worse, there was more than one set. They hesitated only for a moment before curiosity pulled them forward. Each step they took seemed heavier than the last, the floorboards groaning like the shop itself disapproved of their presence. The hallway opened into a back room where shelves were stacked with things that didn't belong: rusted farming tools, cracked mirrors, and bundles of yellowed paper tied with string. One mirror leaned crooked against the wall, its surface so grimy it barely reflected their faces. But when Ethan raised his flashlight, they all gasped. The reflection didn't match them. In the glass, their figures stood, but their eyes were hollow black voids, and their mouths hung open in silent screams. Lila stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus swore under his breath and turned away, refusing to look again. Ethan stepped closer, his camera still rolling. This isn't possible." The moment his hand brushed the glass, the reflection moved on its own. It slammed its hands against the inside of the mirror, the sound echoing in the room. Lila screamed. The reflection of Ethan's face twisted into something monstrous, its grin stretching unnaturally wide. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, it hissed, "Stay!" The lights flickered. For a split second, their flashlights dimmed, and in that instant, something shuffled in the corners of the room. Not reflections, real movement. The sound of dragging feet, closer and closer. Marcus dropped his bag and bolted for the hallway. "I'm not dying in this place." His panicked footsteps echoed, but as he reached the entrance, the door slammed shut with such force the walls shook. The group spun toward the sound. Behind them, the shelves rattled. The jars cracked, spilling foul-smelling liquid onto the floor. The dolls that had lined the shelves in the front room now sat scattered across the floor of the back room, though no one had touched them. Every single one of them faced the group, their eyeless sockets fixed on them. Then, from the darkness behind the shelves, a voice whispered again, lower, sharper. "You should not have come here." Marcus pounded on the door, his fists echoing through the rotten wood, but it wouldn't budge. The handle twisted violently on its own as if someone, or something, was holding it shut from the other side. Lila's sobs filled the air, raw and panicked, while Ethan kept his camera up, the red recording light trembling in his shaky grip. "It's okay," he whispered to himself more than anyone else. "It's just old wood, just the wind." But even he didn't believe that anymore. The shop was alive in a way that made their skin crawl, and every second inside felt like sinking deeper into something they couldn't escape. From the shelves, one of the dolls toppled over. It didn't just fall, it crawled. Its cracked porcelain hand scraped against the floor as it pulled itself toward them, dragging its body like an insect. Marcus swore and kicked it hard across the room. The doll hit the wall with a splintering crack, but before anyone could breathe, they realized the other dolls were moving too. Not fast, not clumsy, but with a slow, deliberate motion, all of them turning their broken faces toward the intruders. Ethan backed into the mirror, his light beam trembling across its surface. His reflection stared back, but this time it wasn't twisted. It was him, only the reflection began to move differently. It lifted its hand when Ethan didn't. It tilted its head at an angle Ethan hadn't made. And then it leaned closer to the glass, its voice hissing from the other side. "You're already dead here." The glass rippled like water. Ethan stumbled back, and suddenly the reflection reached through, its arm pale and skeletal, fingers wrapping around his wrist with a grip like iron. Ethan screamed as he was yanked toward the mirror, his shoulder popping painfully. Marcus and Lila grabbed him, pulling with all their strength until the skeletal hand slipped back into the glass, vanishing. Ethan collapsed onto the dusty floor, clutching his arm, gasping for air. The lights flickered again, but this time they didn't come back. Their flashlights dimmed one by one, plunging the group into near blackness. The only light came faintly from the camera, its screen glowing. On it, the recording showed something they couldn't see in person: figures. Dozens of them. Dark, shadow-like bodies standing in the corners of the room, pressed against the walls, unmoving. Their heads all turned toward Ethan, Marcus, and Lila. Lila's voice broke in terror. There's more of them! They're watching us! Marcus grabbed her hand, tugging her toward the back, deeper into the shop. There's got to be another exit. They ran through a doorway that led into what looked like a storage room. Shelves collapsed and floorboards rotted through. Their footsteps echoed too loudly, almost like something was following. The camera swung wildly, capturing glimpses of faces, distorted, half-formed, glaring from the dark. As they reached the far wall, Ethan spotted something, a cellar door sunken into the floor, its iron ring handle covered in dust. Desperation outweighed fear. He threw it open, and a stench of rot and damp air rushed upward, gagging them. Marcus coughed, covering his face. Hell no! I'm not going down there! But then the sound came again, the dragging feet, closer now, spilling into the room behind them. The cellar was their only choice. Ethan shoved the camera down first, its light faintly illuminating a set of stone steps disappearing underground. He didn't wait to think. He climbed in. Lila followed, her breath shaking. Marcus cursed, eyes darting back at the approaching shadows, then slammed the cellar door shut behind him as he dropped into the dark with them. The three huddled together at the bottom of the steps, the air thick and suffocating. The camera flickered, struggling to hold focus. Then, from the pitch black ahead, two pale eyes opened. The air in the cellar was damp and suffocating, thick with the stench of mold and something sharper, like decayed flesh. Ethan's flashlight sputtered weakly, barely illuminating the rough stone walls. The beam caught fragments of what was stored there, broken crates, shattered glass bottles, and old burlap sacks spilling with blackened grain. But none of them cared about that. All three were frozen, staring ahead into the darkness, where those pale eyes glowed, unblinking, impossibly still. Lila clutched Ethan's arm, whispering so low it was almost a prayer. Tell me you see that too. Before Ethan could answer, the eyes blinked, and then moved. A scraping sound filled the cellar, something dragging itself forward on hands or claws that scraped against stone. The sound grew louder, closer, until Ethan lifted his flashlight. The beam landed on a shape crawling toward them, its limbs too long, its skin sagging like it didn't fit its bones. Its mouth gaped wide, teeth jagged and uneven, dripping with some black tar-like liquid. Marcus gagged, stumbling backward. Nope! Nope! We're not doing this! I'm out! He spun around, pulling at the cellar door above them, but it refused to budge. He shoved harder, panic rising, but it was as if the door had been bolted shut from the outside. Ethan's voice cracked. We can't go back. We have to move forward. The creature let out a sound that was almost human, a distorted moan, low and guttural. It lurched closer, dragging itself as if its legs didn't work properly. The three backed down the steps into the deeper cellar tunnels, the flashlight beam trembling across damp stone walls carved like narrow passageways. Their footsteps splashed in shallow puddles, the smell worsening as they pushed further inside. Behind them, the creature followed, its scraping growing louder. The sound of bone against stone echoed like nails on a chalkboard. Marcus shoved Ethan forward, desperate. Faster, damn it, faster! The tunnel split ahead, two narrow passageways branching left and right. Ethan hesitated for only a second before choosing right, his heart hammering in his chest. The walls here were lined with shelves, only instead of crates or jars, they were filled with bones. Human bones. Skulls stacked neatly, empty sockets staring. Some still had scraps of hair clinging to them, as if they had been pulled from graves. Lila covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. What is this place? She whispered. Ethan couldn't answer. His camera recorded everything, the glow of its screen bouncing off the walls. And then, in that glow, something moved among the bones. A figure stepped out from the shadows, tall, draped in filthy rags. Its face was covered with a cracked porcelain mask, like one of the dolls upstairs. It raised a hand, long fingers curling toward them. "Leave!" it rasped. Its voice wasn't angry. It was mournful, broken, like it had been repeating the same word for centuries. "Leave this place!" For a heartbeat, hope flickered. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it wanted to help. But then the masked figure tilted its head, and more shapes emerged from the walls, peeling out of the shadows, dozens of them, masks glowing faintly in the dark. They moved as one, surrounding the three intruders, blocking every exit. The creature behind them let out another guttural moan, dragging itself closer. The masked figures stepped forward in perfect unison. And in that moment, Ethan realized there was no escape. The tunnel seemed to close in around them as the masked figures advanced, their movements eerily synchronized, like puppets on invisible strings. Each mask was different. Cracked smiles, hollow stares, twisted expressions frozen in porcelain, but all of them turned toward Ethan, Marcus, and Lila as if they'd been waiting. The scraping of the crawling creature behind them echoed closer, trapping them between horrors. Ethan's camera shook in his hands, the little screen flickering with static, as though the device itself couldn't handle what it was seeing. Marcus panicked first. He grabbed a broken femur from the shelf and swung it wildly at the closest figure. The bone cracked against the porcelain mask, shattering it into pieces. For a second, it looked like he'd won, until the thing beneath the mask was revealed. Its skin was gray and stretched thin, eyes sunken deep into its skull, mouth sewn shut with black thread. The figure let out a muffled scream, a horrifying, guttural noise that sent the others into a frenzy. Suddenly the tunnel filled with movement. Dozens of masked figures lurched forward, their steps shuffling, hands reaching out. Marcus swung again, screaming in terror, but the horde was endless. Ethan grabbed Lila's hand and pulled her into a side corridor, the three of them scrambling desperately through the narrow passage. Their flashlights barely lit the way, beams bouncing wildly off stone and bone. The corridor twisted downward, and the stench grew unbearable. Their footsteps echoed against something wet. When Ethan shone his light, he realized the floor wasn't stone anymore. It was soft, spongy, almost like rotting flesh. The walls pulsed faintly, veins running through them, as though they were inside something alive. Lila gagged, covering her mouth. This isn't a cellar anymore. It's something else." Behind them, the sound of shuffling feet and scraping claws closed in. The figures were following, relentless. Ethan's mind screamed to keep moving. "This way!" he shouted, even though he had no idea where the path led. The passage opened suddenly into a cavernous chamber. At the center was a massive wooden counter, like the remains of the shop itself, but warped, melted into the underground stone. Behind it stood a towering figure, cloaked in darkness. Its face was hidden by a mask larger than the others, smooth and blank, with no features at all. It raised its arms, and the walls of the chamber seemed to tremble. The smaller masked figures fell to their knees in unison, bowing to the larger one. The crawling creature slithered into the chamber too, dragging its broken body toward the altar-like counter. The air vibrated with whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping, impossible to understand but heavy with rage and despair. Ethan's camera crackled, the screen flashing strange symbols instead of images. He could barely breathe, his chest tight with terror. The towering figure slowly tilted its head toward them. Then, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers speaking at once, it said, "You have trespassed in the place of the forgotten. Now you belong to us." The floor split beneath their feet, revealing an abyss that reeked of death. Marcus screamed as he slipped toward the edge, Lila grabbing his arm just in time. Ethan held the camera tighter, its red light still recording as though it were the only witness to their doom. And then the ground gave way completely. They fell into the abyss, as though the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Ethan clutched the camera to his chest, the red light blinking wildly, as they tumbled into darkness. The impact came suddenly, hard, jarring, but instead of stone or soil, they landed on something softer, something that gave under their weight. It felt like flesh. The air was suffocatingly hot, thick with the metallic scent of blood. When Ethan lifted his flashlight, he realized they weren't on the floor at all. They were lying on a pile of bodies. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of corpses stacked together, all in various stages of decay. Some still wore tattered clothes from decades past, their skin stretched tight over bone. Others were nothing more than skeletons, their jaws hanging open in eternal screams. Lila let out a strangled cry, scrambling off the mound, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber stretched endlessly, filled wall to wall with the dead. Marcus gagged violently, his eyes wide with horror. "Oh God! Oh my God! This is where they all went! Everyone who disappeared!" His words trailed off when one of the corpses twitched. Then another. The pile began to shift, bones rattling, arms twitching to life. The dead were waking. The three stumbled backward as skeletal fingers reached for them, mouths opening with hollow moans. Ethan swung the flashlight frantically, but the beam only revealed more horrors, faces with sewn mouths, eyeless sockets, broken jaws hanging loose. The corpses dragged themselves toward the living, climbing over each other in an unstoppable tide. Ethan fumbled with the camera, his voice shaking. "This is it. If anyone finds this, don't come here. Burn this place. Don't." His words cut off in a scream as a hand shot out from the pile, grabbing his ankle and yanking him down. He thrashed wildly, kicking, but more hands joined, pulling him into the writhing sea of the dead. Lila and Marcus tried to pull him free, but it was no use. The bodies swallowed him, dragging him beneath the surface until his screams were smothered. The red light of the camera blinked once more.